This is the Franklin, Tennessee Trio's 6th studio album released February 10th via Atlantic Records. This Is Why consists of 10 tracks, clocks in at around 36 minutes, and same as Pierce the Veil. It's a long overdue one, follow-up to the much anticipated follow-up rather to 2017's After Laughter LP. Important to note that this was produced by Carlos de la Garza, who has done like the last few, like at least the last 2 before this one.
Stick with what works, I guess.
Yeah, right.
God knows I've certainly never had an issue with the production on a Paramore record.
So I agree. Let's pick up where we last left off with some of the members of this band.
Okay.
So obviously they haven't.
So Jeremy's rap career has really taken off since we last spoke.
So good. Banger after banger. Maybe not the reason why there was such a lengthy pause between albums. I know that there was like sort of an unofficial step back from the band that Haley took at some point, but
I was going to say in the meantime, we did get 2 solo albums.
So that's what I'm talking about. So we got 2 Haley Williams albums, and important to note, at least Petals for Armor was produced by Taylor York, who's in this band.
And who I imagine probably had some level of involvement with a lot of what happens on this record.
Dude was hovering over the board, hovering over that shoulder. All right, hit me with a couple of things. What do you think about This Is Why? I guess we didn't really do much with where I was going. I was a little indifferent about the Haley Williams solo material. I really liked After Laughter. I'll actually say at the top, without getting into This Is Why, that before coming into this episode, that is very much my favorite Paramore album right now. After Laughter, I think, is the best Paramore album.
That's strong words. I feel like I have so many thoughts, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to start this conversation. I feel like very similar, and this is a bizarre through line to draw, but
take me there.
We talked a lot about how like an artist's solo material can end up influencing the band, and for me, this personally feels like the best version of a Haley Williams solo album, because once you bring the band in, it has everything that the solo albums were missing.
Yeah, I agree.
But I feel like I like that the Haley Williams we're getting on this record feels like the Haley Williams we got on those solo records. So for me, it's almost like a perfect marriage of everything that I think works best for this band, is that you have an artist who's deeply personal and who's willing to go out on a ledge and try some new things. And once you put them back in the driver's seat of this project, they're significantly, in my eyes, they're almost a significantly better vocalist.
Better equipped for what this album is, right? Like if this was Haley Williams coming off of After Laughter into this one, like the fact that like we got to maybe see some of what this album eventually ended up being, get sort of like practiced on with those 2 solo.
You have to wonder if they almost sort of help ease you into this transition, right?
I guess. This album's an interesting one in that like so I love Paramore. I didn't really spend any time with these singles heading into this record. I know that they were out, like it took me like a month to listen to the news, or maybe not a month, but like fucking 2 extra weeks longer than everyone else. And I remember being super hyped for it leading up to anything coming out. And then it was like a matter of, well, I'll just listen to everything when the album comes out. And I was still hyped, but it was like, I wasn't like obsessing over Paramore's return in the way that like having a new actual song to latch onto would, you would expect that to be the case. But so I really want to establish at the top that like didn't really spend any time with those singles coming out of this album. I fucking absolutely adore them specifically though. Really think that they're great. Really good representation of the album as a whole, even though it gets a little definitely different towards the back half. Like this is loaded at the front half with those singles. It's like 1 through 4. Like you got 3 of those singles in there. I think this is a really, really strong album.
I think it's phenomenal, honestly.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely gorgeous.
So on first listen, up until the end, I was like, fucking album of the year, Paramore, in the bag straight away. Like, just cancel the rest of the year. By the time I finished the album, I was like, oh, maybe not so much. I don't know if I'm quite feeling the stuff on the back half. And then a couple of re-listens later, it just pulled me right on back in. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, yeah, this is outstanding. And it's, you know, again, this is Paramore's 6th album, but like out of all of the bands in this scene, outside of like My Chem, I don't know if any of them have aged as gracefully as Paramore have. We're talking like, especially like their contemporaries in the quote unquote emo trinity that somehow has 6 bands in it. Like 21 Pilots have released a bad album. Panic at the Disco have released 7 bad albums. Fall Out Boy have released a couple bad albums. Like Paramore though, fucking still going really strong, arguably better than ever. Really the only competition at this point are My Chemical Romance, who's not going to fall off. Like I'm not going to allow that. Like if I have to step in, I'll step in, but like My Chemical Romance is not going to fall off. So like this album, I think in particular, really helps accentuate the talent level contained within Paramore and just how much left Paramore has to give. Paramore has a lot to say on this album, and I'm glad they get to say all of it. And I think the cool thing about This Is Why is it's got me eagerly looking forward to the next album. And this is the case with like After Laughter as well. And again, that's why I kind of shout out their contemporaries. Like Panic at the Disco never broke up. That last album wasn't really inspiring me to continue being a fan of that band or look forward to their next album. You know, Fall Out Boy is kind of a different story now because we've got new stuff that I think is pretty solid. But like After Mania, like I like that album, but I didn't really care about Fall Out Boy at that point anymore, right?
Let's remove Paramore from the conversation of how they sit with other emo bands, right? That are their, like you said, contemporaries in terms of like popularity right?
And impact in the scene.
I think what I really like about this Paramore record is that they are in no sense married to the expectations that so many other bands are almost weighed down by. You know what I mean? Where it really truly does feel like Paramore doesn't care what anyone asks for. They put out the record that they're interested in making. And that really shines through in something like this, where it just feels like you're getting something that, like, even if you looked at this album and thought to yourself, it's not for me, it doesn't click, it's interesting. And like, I feel like so many other bands end up sounding good but boring. And it's like, I'm almost more fascinated by Paramore taking absolute swings and what it ends up being. So like I went into this record and I thought to myself, you know, based on the singles alone, the worst thing that could happen is I don't like what is ultimately a very fascinating album. Like for me, that's the floor. Like no matter what, this feels like it's going to be interesting. And it was interesting. And then ironically, I also ended up loving it a lot. For me, the hardest thing to do has been to separate this record from the other release we just talked about earlier, because I feel like this does all of the things I wish that did. It has this really vibrant and unexpected instrumental section where I can never pinpoint what direction the band tends to go in. So you'll get these tracks at the top of the album, like The News or like Comme ça, and and they're really like explosive, but then you'll get like these more like quieter stuff in the back end. And then you have like that combination of both of them all in one track with the title track. And at no point in this record could I predict what direction Paramore was going to go to. And there was something so fresh and exciting about that. And I mean that from a very much from like the instrumental end of the band.
I think this is by far the coolest Paramore have ever been instrumentally.
Yeah, and,
like,
and they just feel like they
always
feel
something
alive,
happening.
right?
Yeah. And like we talk about at the top how this is a trio, but I obviously don't think that it is at all the case. Like in practice on this album, like I know that they've got a pretty big like backing band that I've seen them perform on fucking Jimmy Kimmel with, and I think that those people are all actively in the studio with them and really helping bolster the instrumentals on these tracks.
And that's why this record sounds like it's really bursting with ideas, right?
Yeah.
What is predictable in the best way imaginable is Hayley Williams, who is absolutely committed to telling their story in a way that I really enjoy. Like I feel like this record is incredibly personal, similar to the solo records, in a way that other Paramore records have not felt, in ways that Paramore records have hinted at, maybe in more abstract and metaphorical ways. I feel like this is, it's almost more direct. And I feel like that is a product of the solo records in a way that, like, I think the writing style is very different, and I think it's extremely beneficial in making me feel much more connected to this band than I did on the last record, so that it's able to be quirky, but it still feels like it has this very like dire, serious core. But like it's literally in the delivery. Like they do as much as like prove that. Like there are songs where it's like Hayley will go into like this weird like character and it's suddenly like spoken word for like all of like a line or two lines, and then it's right back into this really powerful booming, you know, voice that Hayley is very much known for. But like I don't know, there's so much more character from Hayley Williams. It's not just like being vulnerable and willing to tell your story and all these different things. It's the fact that like Hayley Williams has improved at their craft so much, and that they're incorporating so many different versions of what they do. It's not just like cut and paste. It's like what's really cool about this album is I go into a song not knowing instrumentally what I'm going to get or at all what Hayley Williams is going to deliver. Right. In terms of like their vocal style, right?
One thing I did catch on to, and I don't know about you, but like it especially hit halfway into this album. I think the track is You First. Does that sound right? Something First?
Without having the track listing directly in front of my face.
But like I started to notice, and I guess sonically it's there as well, but specifically I wanted to point it out vocally, is that I can't believe how much Hayley Williams reminds me of Anthony Green on vocals.
I think part of this is that I'm starting to realize that there is sort of a chameleon-like aspect to Anthony Green, where he almost sounds like every vocalist at once.
I don't know. Like
Anthony Green almost sounds like emo music. So it's like by virtue of that, everyone seems to have like.
It's not on the tracks that are like specifically.
No, it's not all the time. Always.
It's
when I say emo, I just mean like the alternative music scene as like an overall.
Specifically the track like Liar, which for me is like as far into Hayley Williams solo material as they get, and for me it's like, I don't know, on first listen I really didn't like that song, and then eventually everything kind of grew onto me in a way that I sort of kind of would have hoped it would have. But that song specifically has so many, like the vocal delivery, the vocal stylings of Hayley Williams on that song in particular really remind me of Anthony Green from Circa Survive, LS Dunes even nowadays. And you're right, like part of it is Anthony Green being a chameleon, but it's not other people that maybe Anthony Green ever emulates or reminds me of that Hayley Williams is reminding me of. It's specifically that one artist. But that's all I really wanted to say there in terms of like the pattern I identified, but you're right. Like, it's a different Haley Williams on every song pretty much. And it makes for such a,
there are these really hard
intriguing
contrasts throughout the
listen.
record between like the vocals and like the instrumentals and stuff like that. And just sort of like the direction like a single song can go in, and like from track to track, it feels like it's constantly pivoting in a different direction, maybe up until the end where we simmer down a little bit, you know. Yeah,
Simmer.
yeah, not intentional, but I feel like the worst thing that could have happened to this band is what people would have asked them for.
Someone else's rap career taking off.
No, is Paramore coming back in the resurgence of the pop punk emo wave?
Right. Are we coming back with a When We Were Young Fest classic, or is it something different?
But it's like, had you asked me 6 months ago, even I would have told you that's what I wanted. And like, in a lot of ways, it does work for other bands, because like, I was thrilled with that first single from Fall Out Boy. But now that I've heard this Paramore record, it's almost like they've corrected my viewpoint. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't know what I could have until I got it.
I don't know, like, it's got to be subconscious in a way. There's something with like Paramore giving you an album you didn't think you wanted versus Fall Out Boy giving you an album you didn't think you wanted, and turns out you were right. Like, the biggest difference that I can point to is the fact that it's so much more genuine and vulnerable. Like, Fall Out Boy try something on Mania, and it's like, we're gonna just try to write cool songs, and it doesn't kind of come off that way. And this is gonna sound so cringe, but like, Paramore write from their fucking heart. And this is very much a pandemic album. Like, this album feels like it was written in, I was going to say solitary confinement. Not quite, but like, that's what the fucking pandemic sort of was, in the sense that like, there's some lines on here that really stick out to me. Forget the track, but one of them being something about gonna go work on my social life.
See the chiropractor.
Exactly? Right.
Yeah.
And like that is your social life now. 'Cause that's just how it is nowadays. Or the song Running Out of Time, where it's like, gonna take my dog on a farther walk this time. It's like, it's the fact that like Paramore can write something so simple and make it work so well.
It feels very human, right? There's a lot of soul to it.
Right. And Fall Out Boy is like, not to pit these bands against each other, but it's a really easy comparison to make, where it's like, Fall Out Boy's brand new album, Sam, we're going to talk about being fucking invincible, immortal. We're fucking champions. It's so dehumanizing in a, like, this album is humanizing.
I don't know if I'm following your thought process at this point, but
I don't know.
But I am
but
in tune with you in terms of what Paramore did. And this sort of circles back to what you said earlier, right? Where you were talking about, hey, Paramore is a band who have done a good job of establishing themselves differently. Not every band has done that, right?
This is a very humanizing album. And like, After Laughter sort of was, and so were all the other albums, but like, this one in particular really clicks for me because I can kind of see the artists behind the art in a way that I can't with like Fall Out Boy, which is what I mean. Sometimes like you talk about like the songs.
And the big difference there is the writing style, honestly. And I think it's changed dramatically from where we were at with After Laughter, because I feel like where we generalize a feeling and an emotion, I think we very directly speak to it on something like this, and we personalize it so that it feels real, and it's not something that you're just being told, you're almost experiencing it as well.
Right.
And that's ultimately, it's like I walked away from this Paramore record and I just felt a connection to this band that I really don't think I've ever had.
Right. Like, you'd never felt it in the past, which is neat. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to add about this album. I don't know. I really liked it.
I don't think I have anything else, honestly. I just
Actually,
really
I
enjoy
do.
everything that it aspires to.
I do. Just because we're closing up on it, and I didn't really want to get into the conversation during the bulk of the review,
Sure.
but I think it's good that you draw the comparison between this one and the Pierce the Veil album, but I look at it under a different lens in that I think that it's all about intention and delivery and execution. And I think that both bands actually succeeded in what they set out to do.
And that's where I disagree with you wholeheartedly.
Let me finish. Because what I mean to say is that, like, again, we talk about like these being pandemic albums, whatever. Like this Paramore album is very lonely and very, I don't know how to really phrase it, but what I mean to say is that
they're different approaches to the same theoretical subject matter.
right, but like the outcome is intentionally different. Like Paramore is very at times like hopeful and dynamic and glimmering and all these things, and I think that like Pierce the Veil pivoted and went in the same direction, just not sonically, but it was intentional. Like I think they wanted to be a little less, like we talk about how like the instrumentals really stick out on this album. I don't think that you take the instrumentals or the approach to the instrumentals from this album and apply it to Pierce the Veil and it makes a better album. I don't think that's the case.
No, they're two completely different styles, but that's not my overall issue with it. And I'll reiterate what I hear are two bands that conceptually had the same idea, but
Okay.
one of them I think was able to lean in and deliver because it's almost like for me, one feels like the commercial version and the other one feels like the artistic version. And it's surprising to me that Paramore is that artistic version and Pierce
Being
the
on
Veil,
the actual major,
right? Being on an actual major label, feeling like a band that maybe is slightly shackled to the idea that they need to hit top 40, right? But alternatively, it's almost like Paramore feels like a band who just like had complete control of what they wanted to do, and they were able to come out and put out a record that really spoke to me, and all of the elements about it ended up being so interesting because it's not buried by the weight of a formula or any outside influence in the way that I feel that Pierce the Veil record is, right? I can't ever directly say what happened or whose intentions it was, but when I listen to that Pierce the Veil record, I feel a band that aspires to be all of these things, but they're constantly held back by what feels like other people's decisions, and they're never able to really do it. They're able to show you what it is that they wanted to do, and sometimes it almost reaches those heights, but I feel like every time it has an opportunity to really break through the way this record does, it has to be drawn back into the things that it's forced to do. You know what I mean?
Yes and no. But it's interesting. It's all very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, right, comparing these two records. And then, of course, the third one we're going to talk about.
You mean at 6?
That's correct.
Truth Decay, their new album.